Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Stern, and I am an attorney and policy advisor here with INCOMPAS. For those of you that don't know us, INCOMPAS is the Internet and Competitive Networks Association, advocating for competition policy across all networks. We have a very diverse membership ranging from internet, streaming, communications, and tech companies, both large and small. And I really want to thank all of you for joining us today in our Thought Leadership Series today on remote learning. It has been quite the year across the globe. And today we wanted to focus on specifically how the pandemic has affected remote learning for schools and libraries, and how different companies and organizations have been helping in that effort. So today I'm so excited to be joined by 3 INCOMPAS members who will all be bringing their different perspectives to the conversation. Today we have with us Kitty Gagne, who's the General Counsel at Education Networks of America, or ENA. We have Jamie Yort, who's the head of Wireless and Spectrum Policy at Amazon. And we have Michael Colhagen, who's the CEO at the Center for Educational Innovation, also known as CEI. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us today. And I wanted to give you each a moment to just briefly introduce yourselves and your organization. So we can start with Kitty and then go to Jamie and then Michael for brief introductions.
Sure. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for hosting this panel. ENA, we provide broadband internet, voice over IP, and related services to schools and libraries throughout the United States. We serve over 685 school districts, over 410 libraries, and we serve rural healthcare providers as well. So we're delighted to be here and share what our customers are letting us know during this time.
Great, thanks, Kitty.
Hi, thanks, Lindsay. Jamie Yort with Amazon. I'm on our public policy team where I work on connectivity issues with a focus on wireless and spectrum policy. I joined Amazon a little over a year ago, and I have the pleasure of working on many different policy issues that enable the innovators at Amazon to do what they do best, which is, of course, create devices and services for our customers that rely on connectivity. And I'm really happy to be here too, and look forward to our discussion on this important topic.
Thanks, Jamie. Michael?
Good. And Lindsay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Center for Educational Innovation is a 30-year-old nonprofit supporting quality public education, focused now more than ever on equity and innovation. Started as a think tank, and now we've also become a direct service provider. We think of ourselves as a clearinghouse for best practice. In support of our mission, we have many for-profit and nonprofit strategic partners to ensure that schools get the resources that they need, which now really include all those technical innovations that we're talking about today. We understand that for true impact, we need both a systems approach and strategic partnerships playing to the strengths of all the partners to ensure for maximum success of all the projects that we put together. So
wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. And it's seriously a privilege to be with you all here today and to be moderating. So thank you again for your time and your expertise. And before we dive in, I just wanted to give a little bit of background for the audience. So there has been a lot of federal funding from Congress and the FCC recently in response to the pandemic and to increase connectivity at home for students and families. And most relevant to today's discussion will be the FCC's Emergency Broadband Benefit program, also known as EBB, and its Emergency Connectivity Fund. So just some quick background on the EBB program, which is a $3.2 billion emergency fund intended to help Americans afford internet service during the pandemic. So low-income households can receive a discount off the cost of broadband service and connected devices. Participating providers can receive a reimbursement for these residential discounts, and schools have actually been enlisted to help providers verify the eligibility of these low-income households through free or reduced school lunch programs. And actually the FCC, perfect timing, just announced today that providers will be able to start enrolling eligible households into the EBB program beginning on May 12th. So that's great news. And then there's also the FCC's Emergency Connectivity Fund, which will be the main focus of today's conversation. And that's a $7.171 billion fund established by Congress to help schools and libraries specifically to promote remote learning to their students, their school staff, and library patrons during the pandemic by funding eligible services and equipment. So the FCC is still in the process of promulgating rules for the fund, and INCOMPAS has been quite active in the proceeding. We represent a number of E-rate providers, as well as tech companies that are offering software and other services to schools and libraries. So we're really excited to see the potential of this fund and for it to help address longstanding needs during the COVID pandemic. And I did want to mention, for those of you attending today that are members of INCOMPAS, please feel free to contact me if you're interested in working with us on these types of issues and FCC proceedings moving forward. And for those of you that are not members of INCOMPAS, we invite you to join us and become a part of the work that we do. So please contact Julia Strau, our Chief of Staff, for more information on how to become a member. And now I want to turn it over to our expert panelists to discuss their views, each as a nonprofit, an E-rate provider, and a tech company, on what they've been seeing as the problems and the solutions for remote learning generally, and specifically during the pandemic. And for our audience, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along, and we hope to answer those towards the end of today's discussion. So I'll start with you, Michael. So CEI, the Center for Educational Innovation, works directly with school leaders, state and city elected officials, communities, and families on issues regarding public school education. So could you kind of paint a picture for us of what it's been like for schools and libraries trying to connect students, teachers, and staff during the pandemic, and why federal emergency programs like the Emergency Connectivity Fund and the EBB program will be so important to help promote remote learning?
Absolutely, thank you. So, obviously the equity and access issue has been brought back to the forefront. We know that everyone must have access, but we want to remind everybody, we always kind of define all. All means all, and those pockets have been identified. So beyond equity, we know that connectivity now must be treated like any other utility and treated as a necessity. And we've worked at a micro level over the last year and a half, filling gaps in schools, literally, sending out hotspots out of my garage and looking for devices to fill gaps in schools. But now we're looking at a macro level, and we're looking at this opportunity to really connect communities with systems and structures with the right technology to meet the needs of public schools and communities and libraries.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And on a similar note, Kitty, so ENA provides internet connectivity, cloud computing services, and other services to education, library, healthcare, and government organizations nationwide. So what has it been like from the perspective of an E-rate provider to connect these anchor institutions during the pandemic? And how will these federal emergency funds help you and your company?
Sure. Well, I think, the pandemic has been a learning process for everyone. And what we may have thought at the beginning of the pandemic didn't necessarily hold true through the duration, as schools and libraries maintained virtual learning environments, both synchronous and asynchronous for students. What we've learned from our customers during the pandemic is the importance of students to be able to log on to the school networks in order to download and receive lessons, and in order to get secure information. So one could argue that at the beginning of the pandemic, you might think that data and broadband usage within a school environment would be less because of the bandwidth demands at home. I know my colleagues and we joke around, hey, tell everybody in the house not to be on the internet right now, I'm doing a Zoom or whatever. And so you would think that strain on residential networks would maybe belie that there wouldn't be as much at schools, and that's just not the case. Schools and libraries are really updating their resources in order to make sure that students can stay online, access records, as well as be in a secure and safe environment to learn. So one thing that was really helpful that the FCC did is open a second COVID window in order for schools and libraries to have access to technology that they didn't necessarily anticipate at the beginning of the pandemic. And our customers applied for those funds. I'm laughing because my Zoom background keeps kind of in, but
it's okay. You look great.
But then the thing that I think is wonderful about what the FCC is doing is right now, just as you mentioned, students are having the opportunity to get subsidies for residential support. That is not a business that ENA is in, but we are certainly delighted that students will be able to learn at home and have access to residential support in order to do homework. I think that that fund is slightly more short-term, whereas the rulemaking, Lindsay, that you mentioned is a little bit more long-term that the FCC is going through. We, as a company, don't know, and I don't think INCOMPAS quite knows yet, what the commission will do with this rulemaking. So the questions that we have as a provider is, whether or not budgets will be set on a school level, whether the school will have autonomy to decide their technology needs, and whether or not there's retroactive eligibility of those funds for services that have already been used by schools. So one of the most interesting things I think, and I bet Jamie would have even a broader view than I would of this, is that this is the first time that end user devices might be eligible under an E-rate-esque program. And so I think it's not just about connectivity and installation, but also now about those end user devices. So that will be really interesting to see how that supports our customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all great points. And I should have mentioned that the Emergency Connectivity Fund, so I said that the FCC is still promulgating those rules, and they actually only have 60 days from when the statute passed, the American Rescue Plan Act. So that should be around May 10th. So hopefully your questions are answered soon. All of our questions are answered. But that was really helpful. And you brought in Jamie, which is a perfect segue. So Jamie, I wanted to get your perspective. What has been the role of tech companies and Amazon specifically in helping close the homework gap? And what steps has Amazon taken, especially during the pandemic, to help promote at-home connectivity for students and families?
Thanks, Lindsay. So, expanding both access and the affordability of broadband has always been a priority for us, but, obviously that is only intensified during the pandemic when it's become very clear, obviously, that connectivity is a necessity. All of us are relying on connectivity more than ever. And unfortunately, millions of Americans still lack reliable, affordable broadband. From a policy perspective, Amazon strongly supports efforts by the FCC and Congress to address the homework gap, as you've already talked about, the Emergency Connectivity Fund and the other proceeding to expand E-rate. From a practical perspective and to meet immediate needs, Amazon specifically has made several donations throughout the pandemic in many different communities. These range from financial donations to logistics donations to device donations, just to do our part to help support children and families. For example, one of many examples is Eero, which is an Amazon business that provides mesh Wi-Fi devices and systems. This is really to help make the most of, the broadband connection within your home. They donated 5,000 euros to teachers and support staff here in DC public schools. And this was also part of a broader Amazon donation that also included Kindle e-readers, kids tablets, and Fire tablets. Just to Kitty's point that, devices are also part of the solution here. And this was, again, to DC public schools and the DC Public Education Fund last year. Just this week, Amazon partnered with the City of Oakland and Oakland Undivided to deliver 1,300 new touchscreen devices for young students and students with special needs. At the start of the pandemic, Oakland Undivided surveyed their students and found that only 12% of students from low-income backgrounds were connected with a computer and internet access. And now access has increased to 98% across all demographics. So it's really exciting, for us just to be a part of that. Longer term, one obvious example of our commitment to expanding broadband access is Project Kuiper. This is Amazon's low Earth orbit satellite broadband project that will deliver broadband to unserved and underserved communities in the US and around the world. We're really excited about it. Amazon will invest more than $10 billion in this project. And, we continue to make progress as we get closer to launching in a few years.
That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned all that because I didn't even know all those examples. And, we often read about Amazon in the news almost every day, and we're not always getting, those perspectives. So I'm glad that you mentioned those, and that's great to hear, of course. And so now I'm going to bring it back to Michael. And CEI has a unique role here of knowing these schools really well and being able to identify their needs, and that includes these schools' broadband needs. So how can CEI serve as an engagement advisor to help connect these underserved and unserved schools with INCOMPAS members that are providing these connectivity services? And Michael, you're on mute. It happens to the best of us. There you go.
Yeah, thanks. As I mentioned earlier, we have many for-profit strategic partners that share our passion for equity and innovation in public education. We are helping communities, and we need to help communities take full advantage of these opportunities. We understand the unique services of the providers, and we want to make sure that the communities understand them, and we help make the appropriate matches so that all of those resources are taken advantage of and providers are actually linked with the correct communities. We're looking to maximize implementation, maximize reimbursements, looking to address, the trust issues with outside providers, the language issues, and looking to act really as a liaison to ensure that we can build in systems that will help, again, maximize those resources and meet the needs of communities short-term and long-term.
Thanks, Michael. That's really helpful. And for those of you listening today and for you service providers, I hope you kind of take what Michael is saying and CEI and, feel free to use that as a resource because it's really unique and really helpful and definitely needed today. So Kitty, I kind of wanted to go back more into the substance of these issues and the Emergency Connectivity Fund specifically. So INCOMPAS, as I said, we've been active in the proceeding and we've filed comments and reply comments here. And something that we've been advocating for is the importance of funding from the Emergency Connectivity Fund to be technology neutral, since we, along with a lot of others, think that it's the schools and the libraries that are in the best position to know which devices and services they need to best connect their students, their staff, and for libraries, their library patrons. And we think that this should include funding for new construction when that's necessary. And I know that ENA has been advocating for similar ideas. So could you explain to us and to our audience why you think tech neutrality and construction of new networks is important to best implement the Emergency Connectivity Fund? And can you also discuss your work specifically? I know you've been advocating for private LTE networks. So could you just let us know kind of why ENA has advocated for these networks specifically to be eligible for the funding?
Sure. Well, if there are installations that can leverage existing technology, that's always best because you don't want to overbuild. And obviously the FCC is concerned with waste, fraud, and abuse. And so overbuilding would fall into that waste category. But that being said, the statute, the 1996 Act and the statute provides for funds for advanced telecommunications and information services. And E-rate relies upon that same definition, which the commission has found in the past includes the installation of facilities. So the second part, when I think about tech neutrality, is, I shouldn't say tech neutrality, it's like net neutrality, but technology neutrality is the Biden administration has stated that more than 30 million Americans are without access to broadband. And so that doesn't include places where there's access to internet service, where service isn't sufficient. It's truly locations in the US, which companies like Amazon and otherwise are looking at long-term solutions, but in the short term, communities may know short-term solutions as to how to provide service where there's not service. And so one thing that's exciting to me about the ECF rulemaking is that there could be a legacy here that isn't just short-term. So devices are nice, hotspots are nice, but there's an opportunity for schools and libraries to hopefully address the homework gap in a more medium or long-term way. And in some cases, so not all, without facilities or new facilities, you can't meet those students' needs where they are, and all the laptops and cool devices in the world won't help connectivity. And then third, I guess I would say that some districts are already doing this. They're already coming up with solutions to find ways to serve their students. And so we learned about this through our customers, this concept of LTE technology and building out networks through RFIs that are public information. We learned about, what schools are doing. So private LTEs networks are secure wireless extensions of the school's WAN. And it provides students who are at home that don't have access to permanent homes, so they could be transient or otherwise, the same network experience that they might receive in the school, firewall security, and so forth. So it's a good remote learning solution. It's not perfect, but I think coupled with what the commission's trying to do with EBB could be good and could leave a long-lasting impact.
Yeah, that's great. And that's super helpful. And, Kitty, while we're still on the substance of these issues and our comments, so something else that INCOMPAS has been advocating for in the Emergency Connectivity Fund proceeding is the importance of retroactive reimbursement for schools and libraries that invested earlier on in the pandemic for remote learning. And we're calling for reimbursement back to January 27th, which is defined as the start of the COVID pandemic. So I know there's a lot of unknowns right now with this proceeding, but from your perspective, what's the likelihood that the FCC will be doing this retroactive reimbursement, and how could that help or impact ENA and the schools and libraries you serve? And if this question is too far removed because we don't know the answer, that's okay too.
Well, I guess maybe Jamie or Michael may have a better idea. If it were retroactive, I certainly just think dollars going to schools is helpful, because dollars to reimburse past services could then go into another pocket of funding for future services. I really don't know what the commission is going to do here, and look forward to the rulemaking. I'm looking forward to those rules in a couple days. I mean, it's probably 10 to 20 days away that we could know. So right. I won't make a guess, but I certainly think that big picture dollars to schools is a great thing. And maybe Jamie or Michael have a different view.
Yeah, no, I would just echo what Kitty said. Not going to make a prediction here either, but obviously the emergency started, last year, and many schools and, were scrambling, at the beginning of that. And so I think from a policy perspective, making it retroactive and making sure that, schools that did act quickly to try to resolve these issues should be able to take advantage of this program.
Yeah, and certainly retroactive reimbursement makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, but we're most interested in building out systems and structures for the future so that we're not dealing with these kinds of gaps long term.
Mhm.
And I just want to add that, we really see learning as 24/7. So, we're looking at before school, during school, after school, and that access has got to be at the home for multiple users, and only with real strong long-term systems and structures can we address this issue once and for all, if you will.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. I think you all made really, really great points there. And so, Jamie, I'm going to go back to you. So many tech companies, including Amazon, are offering software devices and services to schools and libraries. So could you talk about the role of these devices and services, including the cloud services for remote learning, and how schools are using them, and why you think it's important that they be included as eligible for this federal funding?
Sure. So, as we've talked about a little bit, and Kitty touched on this a little bit too, there's a variety of network equipment, devices, services that are enabling remote learning, really on a scale that we really haven't seen before. Cloud computing, as you mentioned, services that support broadband are becoming increasingly important to remote and online learning. Educational institutions across the United States are using cloud services in a variety of reasons. They're using it to lower IT costs, enhance remote learning platforms, perform analytics for educational initiatives, manage student and school staff data, and even prepare students for STEM careers. For example, AWS, Amazon Web Services, has provided cloud services and reliable infrastructure capacity to meet the growing needs for remote learning for a number of educational agencies. AWS Educate is Amazon's global initiative to provide learning resources for building cloud computing skills. This has enabled students, educators, and library patrons across the United States, including those in low technology schools, to have remote access to educational content. Kitty raised this before, but in terms of advanced telecommunications and information services, we think the commission should take an expansive view to include, any services that supports advanced internet connectivity and ensure that schools and libraries continue to receive support for services that offer the maximum benefits for students. And as we've talked about, in addition to a broadband connection, network equipment and devices are also playing a major role, including Wi-Fi routers, modems, mesh Wi-Fi systems, and of course, devices like laptops and tablets. Ultimately, and you've already mentioned this, Lindsay, but ultimately schools and libraries, they should have the flexibility to determine the technology solution that best meets their needs, and more importantly, the needs of school children and their families.
Yeah, totally agree. And we actually just got a very short question in the chat for Jamie. Is Amazon a service provider? How would you answer that question?
Certainly we will be when it comes to Project Kuiper, but that's not online yet. So as of right now, I think, trying to think how my colleagues at AWS would answer. I mean, obviously they're certainly supporting service providers. And we have, other things that are supporting service providers. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'll have to think a little bit more about that, but I lean towards, fully a service provider once we have Project Kuiper. But in the meantime, supporting.
Great. Perfect.
Lindsay, there were two questions in the Q&A that I answered privately. One was, does
sure.
ECF run through 2030? And the answer is yes, according to the statute. And then the other question was, is there going to be a window? And when the rules are promulgated in May and posted and published by the FCC, there will be guidance around, around when the windows are open, eligibility requirements, and so forth. And I'm certain there'll be lots of panels and learning that USAC and the FCC will do to make sure people are aware. Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of the commission, but yeah, I think we'll find that out in May.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for bringing up those questions. And so just moving along, I had a few questions for all of you, and anyone and everyone is, feel free to chip in here. So the Emergency Connectivity Fund, of course, as we've spoken about, is the resource that schools and libraries will likely be using in the future to foster remote learning in communities across the country. But of course, the FCC is also administering the EBB program to help Americans afford internet during the pandemic. So they're separate funds, but they're related in a way. And so do any of you kind of have a perspective how can the EB on how the EBB can complement the Emergency Connectivity Fund in terms of ensuring that students can engage in remote learning off campus and at home?
Yeah, Lindsay, if I may start, you know, to complement the connectivity piece, we really believe that to take a long-term approach, we've got to really understand and look at, you know, replacement of devices and hotspots and access, opportunity for break fix, opportunity for technical assistance and support, an opportunity to help get those refunds and get those companies their disbursements with agencies like CEI as advisors, so that we're maximizing and taking full advantage of the opportunity. Too many times we've seen a great cause and a great initiative from a large for-profit company go underutilized and under-maximized. And we believe that, you know, a concerted partnership is crucial to really make this happen in a long-lasting way, short-term and long-term.
Great, thank you for that, Michael. Anyone else here?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate that as we've seen during COVID, so much of our daily life has become remote. You know, obviously we've focused a lot on school and remote learning, but as evidenced by the fact that we're all doing this on Zoom instead of in person, you know, we're also working remotely and really doing everything, right? Shopping and looking for entertainment, staying connected with family and friends. You know, we've all known how important for a long time how important connectivity is, but during COVID, I think it's just taken on a whole new level. So we appreciate the support and focus of Congress and the FCC on enacting and implementing, you know, both of these emergency programs, looking at both expanding access, you know, affordability, you know, with the EBB's focus particularly on low-income families and tribal communities. You know, I think they work well together. Slightly different focus, but with the overarching focus obviously being on addressing these immediate broadband needs for both students and families more broadly.
Totally agree. All right, I will go to the next one then. So this is, unless Katie, did you have anything to add? If not, we can go to the next question. Okay. So kind of jumping off where Jamie was just going with that. So looking ahead, when we transition back to in-person schooling, will there still be a need for schools and libraries to continue to offer equipment and services to their students, staff, and their patrons for remote learning? And if so, is E-rate going to be enough, or does there need to be continued federal funding to help with remote learning, like these emergency programs we're seeing now?
So I can jump in there. You know, the homework gap was something that we were talking about well before the pandemic. You know, particularly Acting Chair Rosenworcel, you know, talked about it a lot. This is well before the pandemic. So it existed before and it's going to continue to exist after, right? So connectivity issues aren't going to go away just because kids return to the classroom, which I know, having two kids that were home learning today, doing remote school today, I certainly am excited when they're back in the classroom full time. But, you know, connectivity issues for kids and current kids that don't have it today are not necessarily going to go away. So I think it's important to just keep the conversation going and focus on how best to administer these programs to address the needs of students, right? Of course, the immediate focus is on connecting everybody during the pandemic. But again, these things aren't just going to magically go away when the pandemic does, which hopefully is soon, although we'll see.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, we know the new normal is sure to be hybrid. Those without connections or equipment will continue to be at a severe disadvantage and will continue to perpetuate the disparity between the haves and have-nots, if you will. And we need to really capitalize on the lessons that we've learned. And for us, education means personalized learning, continuing online learning, but again, before, during, and after school, for pre-teaching and reteaching and remediation and skill building and enrichment, and to truly attack this equity and opportunity gap. This has to be done in a systematic way with public and private models, partnership models in place for long-term success. This isn't going to go away. This is really just the beginning of this conversation, I really believe. So we're grateful for the funding. We want to make sure that it's used correctly and we get off to a great start.
Great point.
Lindsay, I'll just echo that. I think, we know, so I'm using napkin math. These are not precise numbers, but we know that the E-rate program is a $4 billion program. We know that the demand on that program has been around 2.6 to 2.9 billion per year. And so from a volume standpoint and contribution-based standpoint, I don't know if the E-rate program is the right mechanism solely for at-home devices and supporting the virtual classroom. I do think that this FCC is making bold steps to make sure that they are supporting students in the virtual classroom, and this FCC has the support of Congress and this fund. So I think we'll have to look at what the demand is on the $7 billion program, how it's being allocated, how it's being used, whether or not it is supporting and solving the homework gap. No pressure, right? And I do think that the Universal Service Fund is under a lot of pressure, both through Lifeline, high cost, rural healthcare, and E-rate, all four programs. So I hope that Congress will continue to support it. And I think one of the most wonderful things about the E-rate program is that schools and libraries don't have to worry about the appropriations process on a year-to-year basis to know whether or not their connectivity is going to be supported. And, that's the power of the 1996 Act and the E-rate program. So I'm excited to see what happens, and hopefully that Congress continues to support at-home learning and virtual learning.
Yeah, thank you all. And I mean, it's true. And it'll be interesting to see going forward because, now we're discussing this in the context of the pandemic and learning from home, but it seems pretty clear that the school and the library boundaries have exceeded just the physical walls, and that'll probably be so going forward even after the pandemic. So it should be interesting to see how Congress and the FCC deal with those funding issues going forward. So you guys have pretty much answered all my questions today. But before we close out here, I just wanted to see if there's anything that we didn't cover that any of you wanted to mention, either about the emergency funding program specifically, or on the work that you and your organizations are doing generally. So anyone has the floor if you kind of wanted to just wrap up and mention something we haven't discussed.
Well, I would just quickly say, the only thing I would add to our discussion, which I think has been great today, is that while we're rightly focusing a lot of attention, obviously, on access and affordability and equity, as Michael discussed, we need to consider ways to improve adoption as well. I think there's evidence that shows that even when there's access and even where there's, subsidy programs to help with affordability, not everyone takes advantage. So just thinking through ways to also think about adoption. These programs, they really need to be as simple as possible for eligible participants, especially when we're talking directly to the consumer. And there may be a way for companies like Amazon and others to help think through that and how we can make it as simple as possible for the end customer.
Mhm.
Yeah, and if I may just add to that, in
Yes,
closing, I
please.
want to say thank you for allowing Center for Educational Innovation to participate. For this to be successful, I just want to acknowledge that every community is different, and way beyond schools and libraries, we're going to have to come up with creative solutions and really understand the new technologies to understand how we truly give access to students and families that are not currently able to connect locally. So I look forward to those conversations and really advancing, the understanding of this issue. And the more we can address this issue, the more we address the economic issues, and we really will be able to help students and their families change their economic status through that access and school success and college to career success, and change their economic status and really help with the success of these communities and, move people in the right direction.
Great, thank you so much. And that was wonderful. I just really want to thank everyone again through our audience. We had so many people tuning in today, which is really exciting. So thank you to everyone who is watching, and a huge thank you to our panelists for weighing in with your expertise. It was really wonderful speaking with all of you today, and I really look forward to continuing our work together in the future. So thank you so much again, and it's been wonderful. So thanks.